Joe Rogan was already getting a lot of heat for his anti-vax and questionable COVID content, but then a montage came out of him saying the N-word a bunch of times. Let's discuss. I know most of you will be familiar with this, so let me just quickly summarize the anti-vax stuff, and then we'll move on to the racist history. Joe Rogan was originally prided to be this amazing conversationalist who would bring on right-wingers sometimes and then left-wingers sometimes and could facilitate just these great conversations from all sides. But then increasingly, his guests became more and more right-wing, especially when it came to the topic of COVID and COVID vaccines. Recently, he had a number of people on his podcast who cast doubt on the vaccine and told verifiable lies without giving the context that that's the severe minority of the medical opinions, and he would not give nearly as much time or voice to the more credible medical experts. Neil Young brought a lot of attention to the subject by saying he would take all of his music off Spotify if Spotify didn't take Joe Rogan off of their platform. He felt that the disinformation that Joe Rogan and his guests were spreading was dangerous enough for him to make that threat. Spotify decided not to take Joe Rogan's podcast off of their platform, and to his credit, Neil Young did remove his music from the platform. Other musicians then came out and said they would follow Neil Young's lead, and so Spotify added a little disclaimer on certain episodes whenever there was questionable information being discussed. Joe Rogan did release an apology video, and while he did some justification for the misinformation he was spreading, he did say he was going to try to do better and would bring on more credible medical voices, which is good. I'm not going to show it to you. It'll be linked below because I want to get on to the next part of this topic. Okay, so now we get to the subject of this video. A video montage then came out of Joe Rogan saying the N-word a bunch of times over the years, and of course it is all going to be bleeped out, but here's the video.
Like, you know, the thing.
Yes. Saying the word
You've already said
D is just like saying
she's calling you a it's like this
boy that he's a and starts calling them word. There should be a word like especially like the word that's our about he says guy a and then our starts saying allowed to use the word out the word see word say and he couldn't say else.
Okay, so I'm going to get to the apology video that he released for this, but I first just want to say some of those clips were from his last studio. So he lived in Los Angeles. That was his most recent studio in Los Angeles, and then recently he moved to Austin, Texas. And so this isn't one of those situations where you can paint over it because it was so long ago. No, this was in the last number of years, and it's been clear my entire life. As a white person, you just don't use the actual word. You can just say N-word. Everyone knows what you're talking about. It's not so important to use in any story that you have to actually use the word. It really doesn't make any sense to me that someone that's existing in that time frame could possibly think that's something that's appropriate, that's not going to be insanely offensive and completely unnecessary. And to be clear, there really is no context where you need to be using that word. And the reason I specify that is he'll go on to say the reason that he was using it is in reference to other times that other people used it and talking about, oh, this person called this person that, but he wasn't reading direct quotes, which also I think you shouldn't do, but that is a little bit more like, okay, you made a mistake, you read a direct quote. You can see in that video, it's not him reading a quote, it's him just kind of telling a story where the word was dropped in. And we'll continue with him specifically, but can I just also say, I don't understand why anybody's confused by this. I've heard people on other podcasts and in other scenarios saying, oh, when are you allowed to use it as a white person, blah, 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 blah. It's not difficult. Just don't use it. You can just say N-word. Easy. Done. I don't understand why this is difficult for grown adults to understand. So that montage was bad enough, but then a video came out of him telling a story on his podcast of him and his friend going to see the movie The Planet of the Apes. But then I guess they got dropped off in a neighborhood that had a lot of black people, and he made the joke that it was like they were in the Planet of the Apes. So let's watch that clip.
No white people. It says, okay, take me to this one. And the guy goes, okay. I goes, is that in a good neighborhood? He's like, oh, yeah. Guy barely speaks English. He takes us there. We get out, and we're giggling. Oh, we're going to see Planet of the Apes. We walk into Planet of the Apes. We walked into Africa, dude. We walked in the door, and there was no white people.
So that one hit me even more than the one before because, okay, you're the most ignorant person in the world and you think, oh no, but I was telling a story. I didn't realize. I thought it was only if you're calling somebody it, and still wrong, but maybe it's just a bunch of ignorance. But that's just any way you cut it, plain old racism. So before I continue with my commentary, let's go ahead and look at Joe Rogan's apology video for all of this.
Hello, friends. I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly. There's a video that's out that's a compilation of me saying the N-word. It's a video that's made of clips taken out of context of me of 12 years of conversations on my podcast, and it's all smushed together, and it looks horrible, even to me. Now, I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I haven't said it in years, but for a long time, when I would bring that word up, like if it would come up in conversation, instead of saying the N-word, I would just say the word. I thought as long as it was in context, people would understand what I was doing. Like that context was part of the clip we were talking about Red Fox, how Red Fox said that word on television in the 1970s and how times have changed so much since then. Or about how Richard Pryor used it as one of the titles of one of his albums. Or I was quoting a Lenny Bruce bit, or I was quoting a Paul Mooney bit, or I was talking about how Quentin Tarantino used it repeatedly in Pulp Fiction. Or I was talking about how a Netflix executive, ironically, used it because he was trying to compare it to another offensive word, and he said it out loud, and they fired him. Not calling anybody or just saying the word out loud. I was telling a story on the podcast about how me and my friend Tommy and his girlfriend, we got really high. We were in Philadelphia, and we went to go see Planet of the Apes. And we didn't know where we were going. We just got dropped off by a cab, and we got dropped off in this all-black neighborhood. And I was trying to make the story entertaining, and I said, we got out, and it was like we were in Africa. It's like we were in Planet of the Apes. I did not, nor would I ever say that black people are apes, but it sure sounded like that. And I immediately afterwards said, that's a racist thing to say. Planet of the Apes wasn't even in Africa. I was just saying there's a lot of black people there. But then I went on to talk about what a positive experience it was and how much fun it was to go to see this movie in a black neighborhood. It wasn't a racist story, but it sounded terrible. And like I said, you can have clunky stories about anything, but not about race.
So I really don't understand the twisting at the end. Oh, I would never call black people that. But you did. That's what the whole story was. There's no other way you can interpret that joke he was making about the Planet of the Apes. It's him using one of the oldest, most well-known racist tropes. And that's why I said earlier, okay, maybe you can use the ignorance defense to say, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to use it, even though that seems so stupid. And it's still incredibly offensive and bad. But then when it comes to that second clip, there's no way you can interpret it than him just thinking racism is funny. Now, why am I talking about this? Joe Rogan gets 11 million listens on his podcast episodes. That's 3 times Tucker Carlson, who's the most viewed cable news show, which don't even get me started on him. The fact that he is the most viewed is just like... So Joe Rogan's sway is massive and his influence is unmatched. So it's so important that we collectively push back on these massive voices whenever they're spewing hateful and harmful things. So let me go ahead and do a wrap up on my response to all of this in 2 parts, the anti-vax stuff and then the racist stuff. So first, anti-vax. Joe Rogan calls himself just an entertainer. My podcast is just supposed to be for enjoyment. He said this so many times. Every single time he gets criticized for putting out false material, he'll go, oh, but I'm just chatting with my friends. We're just bantering back and forth. It's not like it's a news show, so you can't hold me accountable. And his audience definitely says that too. It's just, come on, it's Joe Rogan. He's just hanging out with friends and talking. Why are you on his case? But it's not just that he has a massive audience. It's that he makes the choice. He does to cover very important life or death topics like COVID and the vaccine. That's his choice. If he wants to have the biggest podcast and just smoke weed and talk with his friends about this and that, okay. But if he wants to cover subjects that if you put out false information on them, people can die, then yes, you are going to have to be held accountable, and you are going to have to put in a little bit more work to make sure that your information is factual. So again, yes, if you have 11 million listeners and you want to cover important topics that affect those 11 million listeners, then I'm sorry, buddy, for your $100 million contract, you're going to have to do a little bit of reading before you go on air. Because I know some people who listen to Joe Rogan and they don't keep up with like the news of the day. They're not read up on what's going on. And I'm telling you, they would have gotten their vaccine, never even thought about it. But then because of Joe Rogan, they have all these concerns that aren't backed up by the science. Luckily, they had already gotten vaccinated before they picked up on all this from Joe Rogan. But you take 11 million people, there's definitely going to be a lot of people who would have gotten vaccinated but didn't, solely because of Joe Rogan. And now because of that, statistically, they're much more likely to die. And I'm saying there's a real chance that someone in Joe Rogan's audience died who wouldn't have because of Joe Rogan's misinformation. Not necessarily, but that's the seriousness of talking about these important subjects when you have such a massive audience. So he said he's going to do better. Hopefully that's the truth. Good. Now the racism. So I've seen the debate going around of, is he a racist? You know, the term a racist. And to an extent, I find it unproductive because defenders will say, oh, no, he's not. You're just trying to cancel him. And then critics will say, well, that was racist. So yes, he is a racist. But my take on this is it's just undeniable that what we just saw is called racism. That was racist. And if you can't accept that, you're not accepting reality. How you want to move forward now is up to you. If you think, okay, it was an honest mistake, he's not a bad guy, I still want to listen to him, that's your choice. But denying that what we just saw was not racist is complete lunacy. And it's totally acceptable. It's not cancel culture. It's totally acceptable for broader society to condemn and try to hold accountable the biggest influencer maybe on the planet whenever you find out that he is totally comfortable using the N-word all the time and tells very racist stories. It's totally fine to want to hold him accountable. And in regard to both these subjects, he apologized for both, which is what you're supposed to do, but I do think actions speak louder than words. And so it looks like Spotify is going to keep him on their platform. And as long as that's the case, he needs to get on every single day and show that he's actually come out the other side of this, having learned a thing or two, and actually do better on his podcast. And regardless of what consequences you or I think he should have for what we just watched, he does have a massive audience, and it looks like he's keeping that massive audience. And so the best that we can hope for, as long as that's the case, is that he'll research properly before going live and talking about these important subjects like COVID. And I'm interested to hear what Black individuals think he should do, because obviously that's the group that he's offending. And so if he can, and then how he would be able to right some of these wrongs. And like I said, maybe he can't, and that's that. But in my opinion, A Stark could be uplifting Black voices on his podcast, because clearly he and his audience have a lot of ignorance, and learning is the best medicine for that. And that, of course, is assuming it was ignorance on the part of Joe Rogan and not maliciousness, but that is for you to decide. Here's what else you need to know today. The Supreme Court issues a stay on the gerrymandered Alabama district map, which means for now it will be allowed to be drawn that way, but they may come back to it in the future. And this district map severely finagles the population in such a way that only one district is majority Black in the entire state, whenever over a quarter of the state's population is Black, which does not match what a fair representative map would yield. GOP representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger were censured by the RNC for their roles serving on the House Select Committee investigating January 6th. The RNC called January 6th legitimate political discourse. Wow. The divide among Republicans is continuing to deepen, with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell pushing back against the RNC's actions, calling January 6th a violent insurrection and saying they shouldn't be calling out Cheney and Kinzinger, while House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy defended and supported the RNC's actions. Canadian truckers and other protesters are now blocking North America's busiest international crossing over COVID-19 restrictions. And finally, governors in Connecticut, Delaware, New Jersey, and Oregon all announced the end of their statewide mask mandates. Be well, everybody.